And a trigger warning. We are learning that at least 165 female prisoners were raped and then burned to death. This video shows where and when this horrifying mass rape took place. You are looking at inmates fleeing from a prison in the Democratic Republic of Congo. More than 4,000 detainees made it out that day. But before their escape, some of the men carried out the mass rape of 165 women, then set the prison alight. Most of those victims died in the fire. That's according to the United Nations. Only around a dozen female inmates who had also been raped survived the blaze. Now, fighting has been taking place in Goma as a feared and dangerous rebel group called M23 battled government troops for control of the city, which is in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo. In a matter of days, the M23 rebels forcibly seized the city. Now, systematic sexual violence has plagued the Democratic Republic of Congo for decades. Now, with the conflict spiraling out of control, women and girls are yet again.
Tragedy in Goma, the forgotten voices of over 150 female victims. Picture a prison bursting into chaos. Inmates scrambling, fire raging, innocent women trapped in a nightmare, their cries unheard. This was the grim reality of the Goma jailbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo, a tragedy that left more than 150 female inmates raped and burned to death. The Muzenza prison wasn't just a detention center. It became a site of unspeakable horror. Amid the chaos, nearly 4,000 prisoners escaped, unleashing violence. For the women trapped inside, the nightmare didn't end with the jailbreak. Their ordeal became a shocking chapter of sexual violence and human loss. These women, confined in prison, became victims of deliberate and brutal aggression. Reports estimate that 165 female inmates suffered sexual violence before the perpetrators set the prison ablaze. Survivors number between 9 and 13, each left with devastating physical injuries and lifelong emotional scars. What happened to these women wasn't random. It was targeted violence. The women were defenseless, their humanity trampled. They became victims of not just one atrocity, but two. Brutal sexual assaults followed by the horror of fire and destruction. The extremity of the assault was matched only by the scope of the chaos. As fire engulfed the prison, the women had no chance for escape. Most were consumed by the flames, another heart-wrenching symbol of how quickly their voices were extinguished in this unthinkable tragedy. For the survivors, the scars run deep. Physical and mental trauma linger after an incident so horrific that it cuts to the heart of human rights and dignity concerns. Their survival, however, speaks to resilience in the face of overwhelming darkness. This tragedy unfolded against the backdrop of an ongoing conflict in eastern DRC. Rebel groups like the M23 have fueled instability, and the Muzenzi jailbreak became another testament to the country's deep struggles. Violence against women in conflict zones reflects larger systemic failures that demand urgent global attention. When rebel clashes with Congolese forces erupted nearby, they created an opportunity for mass chaos. But the question remains, where was the protection for these women? The systemic negligence underscored the deep failures that contributed to the harrowing results of this jailbreak. The international response to the tragedy has been swift but insufficient. The DRC government condemned the horrific crimes, while the United Nations launched investigations. Reports also include allegations of further human rights abuses by Congolese troops, highlighting the broad reach of violence tied to this incident. The investigation now faces an uphill battle. How can justice be served in a system riddled with corruption and impunity? Accountability is necessary, but it's equally critical to address the systemic conditions that allowed this tragedy in Goma to occur in the first place. The Goma jailbreak mirrors a larger crisis of abuse against women in conflict zones worldwide. Women are disproportionately targeted during times of war and instability, and sexual violence is wielded as a tool of oppression. Survivors face overwhelming stigma, leaving them voiceless in the aftermath. This horror is a global wake-up call. From leaders to activists, everyone must engage in actions that end this endemic pattern of violence. Women in conflict zones deserve our protection, and the world must unite to ensure their safety and visibility against such atrocities. Tragedies like Goma demand more than just outrage. They call for swift transformation. From prison reforms in the DRC to addressing the root causes of conflict, there's an urgent need for long-lasting measures. Justice must extend to amplifying the voices of survivors and providing them pathways to healing. Let's take a stand. A tragedy of this magnitude cannot fade into silence. Share the voices of the Goma victims and demand action. Hold governments accountable and support human rights organizations working to protect the defenseless. Together, we can fight for a future where no one suffers in silence.